Welcome to the Wine Zone. I'm Konradulations, and this is Pro and Con. I'm delighted to welcome back Master Sommelier John Szabo to the show. Thank you. Thank you. He's just released a groundbreaking new book called Volcanic Wine, Salt, Grit, and Power. I'll be showing you a copy here in a sec. And curiously, it's only been out a couple of months. It's already sold out of its first printing globally.
Well, the first shipment to North America was out of stock. They'll ship a few more from China or wherever it's printed at some point.
Right.
But yeah, I'm delighted with the way sales have gone in just a few short weeks. It's probably about over half sold.
Fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Now, what sparked the idea of focusing on volcanic wines as opposed to, say, limestone or schist or just on the general influence of soil?
I have to say I didn't start out with the idea of picking a soil type and wrapping a book around it. It came up kind of accidentally a few years ago. I was asked to write an article on some of my favorite wines, or my favorite wine, which is always a difficult thing for wine folks like us to do because we have many favorites.
So many.
And all of the...
It's whatever's in our glass today, if it's well made.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you know, there are some favorites that everyone has, and I could have thought of Champagne or Barolo or Burgundy or something like that, but not very original. So I thought, all right, what are some of the new exciting wines that I've recently come across? And I've just recently been to Santorini. I've been to...
We were on that trip together.
We were, yes.
Yeah. Cool story.
That was one of the pivotal moments of my life.
It changed your life, I'm sure. It changed mine, John.
But you know, there I was in front of my computer thinking about wines, and I thought, wow, Santorini, really enjoyed those wines. That's something a little different, a little new, something to introduce people to. And then I thought of Mount Etna. I made my first trip to Mount Etna in Sicily around that same time, and was absolutely captivated by the red and white wines growing on that volcano. And of course, Hungary, with my connection there, I go back frequently, and I've always loved the wines of Lake Balaton on the North Shore in particular. And Tokai, of course, and suddenly, you know, something clicked. It dawned on me that the one thing that links all of these different wines together is the fact that they grew on volcanic soil. So that became my article, right? My favorite wine grows on a volcano.
Yeah. No, so it seems to me now that you've created almost a seismic shift in how we view wines, as wines to be regarded as volcanic and non-volcanic. It almost breaks it down like that.
Well, that's certainly one way of looking at it. I wouldn't want to reduce the world of wine into just two main categories, two camps like that.
Well,
I don't want to be...
Obviously, there's going to be nuances in everything. But, okay, like early in the book, you say minerality and volcanic wines walk hand in hand. Okay, so I understand you're not saying that all minerality comes from volcanic soils, but that, I'm guessing, all volcanic soils offer minerality.
I would say that overarchingly, the wines that I came across in my research and travels that happened to come from volcanic soils tended to be on the more savory, the more minerally side of the spectrum, as opposed to fruity wines. Of course, you can get minerally wines from lots of different soil types, and there's fruit in volcanic wines. But if I had to cleave the world into two main style camps, for me, wines fall into the savory side or the fruity side, and volcanic wines tend to be on the savory side.
So, what then is the difference between the minerality that we see that you've explored in volcanic wines as opposed to the minerality from calcareous or limestone soils? In theory, and also on the palate, say in a blind tasting, how would I differentiate those two mineralities?
Well, you've cut right to the heart of the most difficult matter. The one main sort of stumbling block I kept coming up against time and time again researching this, and believe me, I talked to many geologists and soil scientists, and of course winemakers and researchers, and it turns out that it's almost impossible, I should say, very difficult to prove with any kind of scientific rigor a direct connection between soil chemistry, mineral elements and nutrients, and wine chemistry, although there's a link there for sure, but it's very circuitous, and there are so many...
There's a lot of resistance from some factions.
Well, I think you can't deny that soil composition affects the way that a plant grows. I mean, that's
True.
basic. And therefore the way the fruit develops in that plant, in this case a fruiting vine. And then it's not an illogical extension to then believe that the wine created from those grapes grown in this particular soil is in some way, maybe even seriously, modified by the soil type.
Okay. So, but obviously also by the grape, which makes it so difficult, for example, to talk about Santorini, which we have here, and Chablis. One would be a volcanic minerality, the other would be a completely a calciferous minerality. But I'm curious, we'll just talk about volcanic wines. So Santorini, the whole surface of it is pumice. It's like this, it's like this hard foam, and I wanted to know about, because you've studied so much about volcanoes. Is this like the scum that forms on top of a stalk when it's boiling, right?
That's a great way of looking at it.
And then it cools, but it cools as this hard foam.
Well, you have to imagine that the eruption in Santorini, 1620 AD or BC, thereabouts, was the largest in known history in the last 10,000 years. Something like 60 cubic kilometers of material was ejected from this volcano.
Bigger than St. Helena a couple of decades.
By orders of magnitude larger than that. I mean, this was an eruption that modified the climate in the Mediterranean, in fact around the world, for years after the eruption.
Eons, yeah.
And it took 400 or 500 years before the island was even inhabitable again. So all of this material erupted, and it wasn't just pumice, but that's a lot of what fell down. But interspersed with that are big chunks of rock, smaller chunks of rock, everything that volcanologists would call pyroclastic material, stuff that gets spat out of a volcano. But it wasn't an effusive lava flow, so you don't get hardened layers of lava. You do actually from previous eruptions, but this main one dumped for the most part this lighter material that then compacted into a fairly hard, I can't even call it a soil type, but locally they call it aspa, which is, as you say, this hardened sponge cake of sorts.
Yeah, I'm curious. Well, I mean, if that thing blew out, it must have blew rocks for hundreds of miles.
You can see them sort of mixed in. You know, it looks a little bit like a sausage with big chunks of meat and then some smaller ones ground up around it.
Now, I assume you went into the project with a certain thesis and potentially some preconceptions. What did you discover in your research for the book that completely took you by surprise, completely came out of the blue?
I discovered that it's virtually impossible, as we were just discussing, to find this direct link that I thought would surely be there. And I was probably a little bit naive even about my own definition of volcanic wine. I had to amplify that considerably, having learned that there's no such thing as a volcanic soil. It comes in an amazing array of different chemical compositions. Just think about the age. Volcanic soils, if you want to call them that, can range from a few days to several hundreds of millions of years old, right?
Right. I crossed on Big Island in Hawaii, where you have the living volcano, the Mauna Kea, which keeps dumping into the ocean. You have so many versions of it because it's been coming out and coming out. You have like lava that's days old, and lava that's 500 years old, and lava that's 1,000 years old, and there are a couple of scrubs growing on it.
Right.
And everything else is just useless.
Well, they say it takes about 100 years for, let's say, a lava flow to start to be able to harbor plant life of any kind. Mm-hmm. We've got constant eruptions with another laminate layer of lava on top of it. Well, then you're not going to get any growth at all.
Right.
So this was the main challenge, trying to come up with one single definition of volcanic soil. And then even lava comes in an amazing array of different consistencies, chemical composition, from basalt, which is very heavy it's a heavier and darker type of basalt, lots of iron, lots of magnesium, to the other end of the spectrum where you've got rhyolite, which is a much paler type of lava. So even within lavas, you can't even compare the chemical compositions, quite dramatically different.
There are going to be places where you have variety of volcanic soils literally abutting each other, because what spews out isn't really, it's almost like a marble. It's like a marble ice cream, no?
Most of the time, what comes out of a volcano,
minerals, I mean, of minerals.
I mean, what you get out is what you have inside, and the composition of that magma, as it's called, before it moves above the Earth's surface, and we call it lava. But as magma, the composition in each volcano is more or less the same. But you do come across some volcanoes whose magma composition changes over the course of these millennia, right? So you have a basaltic eruption followed by a rhyolitic eruption followed by everything in between. So you get, a complete smorgasbord of different types of lavas, and therefore soils that derive from this lava as it breaks down into soil.
One of the differences that I've noticed with the soils or with the volcanic soils is that most of them have a high iron content. Is that
as soon as you start talking in absolutes, the geologists and the soil
okay,
scientists,
more iron content than non-volcanic soils.
One thing I will say about volcanic soils in general is that they tend to have a broader range of mineral elements than other rock types, soil types, right? So limestone is basically calcium carbonate, right? It's got a lot of one or two types of elements, whereas volcanic soils tend to have a really broad range. You're going to have iron, potassium, magnesium, every essential nutrient that a plant could need is somewhere in that matrix. Now, whether or not it's available depends on whether it's still a chunk of rock or whether it's weathered into
desiccated or whether climate, etc.
Climate is a huge factor there. Without rain, like in Santorini, those soils are very young. They're only 3,000 odd years old, but there's also no rain, so it'll take millions of years to weather into a really fertile nutrient.
Of course, to break down. Of course.
But as we know, for grape growing, you don't want an overly fertile soil, and I think that's one of the sort of paradoxes. People think of volcanic soil as being extraordinarily fertile, and of course it is. If it's in a subtropical area and it's weathered to the right degree, then it has an amazing fertility.
It's got organic material in it.
And with some organic material which retains water, so it's great for coffee beans, it's great for potatoes and tomatoes, and all sorts of other produce. Not so great for grapes. The best grapes from volcanic soils tend to come from very infertile versions of volcanic soil. So, essentially still rock with very little soil. You'll see some photos of the Azores in there, for example, Pico Island. So little soil there was, they had to actually, with pickaxes, break apart the rock, make a little space, go over to the next island, and by boat, bring back dirt, dump it into the hole, and then plant a vine in that.
Totally. Beautiful photographs, and photographs of that, Pico and Madeira and all the islands, just some of the unusual arrangements that people have come up with in order to survive on volcanic soils.
I'm fascinated to no end by the endurance, perhaps the folly of humankind to work in some of these places that are extraordinarily backbreaking, difficult, and in the case of an active volcano, downright dangerous. Your life's work can be obliterated in a heartbeat.
Right. I noticed on the maps, you have terrific maps in here. Terrific maps. The cartographer.
Yes, that was one of the toughest aspects of the whole project.
How did you find this person?
Lots of RFPs out around the world, from New Zealand to California to Europe. This cartographer is based in the UK, and he just had the right approach, I think.
Absolutely, I love the maps. I'm a map geek, and I love the maps. I almost learn more from looking at the maps and studying the maps than I do from reading the details.
Wow.
That's me. I'm visual.
I'm very visual as well, as you can see by the 400 plus photographs.
Yeah,
and the
fantastic.
maps.
You took them all, right?
The vast majority.
Did you really?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent, terrific. I thought that they were all sourced from somewhere, but no. You got some good photography skills too.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, that's terrific. Now, as a sommelier, your main preoccupation is often food and wine pairing. How do volcanic wines pair with foods differently from non-volcanic wines? Or is that a stupid question?
Well, we can draw some sort of generalizations, considering that I cover hundreds of different grape varieties from 22 different regions and climates ranging from very cool continental in northern Germany to subtropical in Madeira and the Canary Islands. The range of wine styles is pretty vast and pretty broad. But going back to my original point about this family of flavors found within volcanic wines, this minerality, this salinity, I mean, quite palpable saltiness in many cases. It's my little pet theory that that's due actually to some measurable component of mineral salt.
Mineral salts, of
Magnesium
course.
salts, potassium salts. In the case of seaside vineyards, it's sometimes just plain old sodium chloride. Literally, you've been by the seaside.
Right.
You can smell the salt, and salt gets deposited on the grapes, and you end up with a salty wine. That's not soil-derived minerality, but it's saltiness nonetheless.
It does affect it. It does affect the taste, sure.
And then the other kind of overarching feature that I found in so many of these wines was this tension, this energy, this vibration. And I did speak to some people, and this will sound a little bit far-fetched, but volcanic rocks on the spectrum of measurable magnetic radiation are very, very high. They just seem to have more energy than other types of rock. Does that somehow transfer into the wines?
Molecules of lodestone or something like that?
Something like that. I don't know. These molecules are vibrating at a very high pitch, and how that translates into wine, I don't know, but the flavors that I can perceive, and others can as well, have this vibrational energy, this call it acidity, for lack of a better word, but it's a tang.
I get it.
The salt and the tang
Yeah.
with food is a fantastic combination.
I'm curious if there, I mean, you know, I go into weird thoughts myself, but I'm curious if this magnetic soil prefers to have grapes planted on a north-south bias as opposed to an east-west bias. Maybe there's your next book.
That's
north-south
volume
lines.
22 or 23. I'm not sure if I'll get that far down the line, but that'd be an interesting line of research to follow.
Okay, so whatever happened in British Columbia?
So the way I selected these regions, and of course there were many that could have, should have been
Yeah.
there.
Oh yeah.
perhaps.
This is
There's
not.
a lot of
Is you feel that it's complete? You've covered all the major volcanic regions.
No, absolutely not.
Is there a volcanic wines number 2, or is there, or just
We'll see.
an addendum?
You'll tell us whether there'll be volcanic wines number 2, but I would love to
Write
go
it,
to
write it,
Japan.
definitely.
I would love to go to New Zealand North Island and Waiheke Island. Yes, there is some volcanic soil in British Columbia, but at some point I had to draw some borders around the regions for more mundane constraints like time and resources to get
Right.
around the world.
Right.
So there had to be the convergence of some obvious volcanic origins of the soil. There had to be a critical number of producers. Couldn't be just one or two folks toiling away in some lost island in the South Pacific. And there had to also be good wines, I mean good quality wines that we would agree are at the top level. And there had to also be, I think, some recognition within the region of their volcanic origins. Now, not everyone's trumpeting that their grapes grow on volcanic soils, although that's changed a lot, even in just a few short years since I've been working on this. But in BC, well, Mount Boucherie at the north end of Okanagan Valley is an extinct volcano, but not once have I seen anyone mention that. There aren't that many producers up there, and it just didn't fit into the time.
Are there grape varieties that don't like volcanic soil?
I think grape varieties change quite notably on volcanic soil. Whether or not they like it or don't like it, it depends on the consumer, whether they like the results of it. But take Assyrtiko, since we have a bottle of it here on the table.
Right here, yes.
So that's from Santorini, obviously volcanic, but it's a grape that now grows quite widely throughout Greece, and you'll find it up in Macedonia, for example, in Drama region, where it takes on a completely different character. Same grape variety, the same methods of growing and vinifying, there's nothing really magical there, but up north, fruity. In Santorini, I mean, you struggle to find even a whiff of fruit here. This is not a fruity wine. This is savory, salty, minerally, very volcanic.
And in a blind tasting, you could probably confuse it with Chablis.
Sometimes I've confused it with old Riesling, old Gruner Veltliner.
Yes. Okay.
Certain styles of Pinot Gris, particularly mineral ones. So anyway, I think it's a fantastic grape that goes in a number of different directions. Do you like that? I could pour this for, I'm sure, many people who would have their first sip and say, I don't really like that. It's salty, it's gritty, it's not fruity, it's challenging to drink. It's it's a demanding wine.
It is. It's
back.
But if you take a moment with it, it's extremely satisfying. Well, more than a moment. You need more than a moment. You need to cut people out for about 10 seconds and just commune with the wine and get it all. Get it all. This is a fantastic book. What are you working on right now? I know you're not an idler, so you're working on something new that's going to come out next year. What's happening?
Well, I have an idea for another book project.
Yeah.
It's not going to be limestone wines or granite wines.
No, not riverbed
or
or
move away
floodplain.
from the soil for a bit. And my idea is, and I still have to discuss this with the publisher, but it's to again champion some lesser known wine regions, grape varieties, wine styles that are in danger of disappearing. And under this umbrella would fall wines from very, very steep slopes, all those terraced vineyards.
Cinque Terre.
In the Cinque Terre, up in the Valtellina in northern Italy, and the list goes on and on. But these are areas that are very difficult to farm, and the commercial recognition isn't there to command a price that justifies the work. And I think it behooves us as folks in the industry to help preserve the diversity in the industry. I would hate to see those wines disappear simply because North American consumers didn't know them well enough to spend the money to sustain them.
Yeah, and North American consumers may decide that there are some grapes that might work well here in this country. Right? I'd like to see more experimenting here in this country.
I agree. The beauty of the world of wine for me is the diversity. Yeah, I'm sure you don't drink the same wine for dinner every night. I certainly don't. I rarely buy a full case of wine.
I always empty the bottle. Listen, John, this is my opinion. This is the best book ever written by a Canadian, best wine book ever written by a Canadian.
Wow.
And I say good luck with it.
I think it's going to do really well. I hope it does well. And it deserves to do well. This is it. It looks fantastic. My guest has been Master Sommelier John Szabo, author of this new book, Volcanic Wine, Salt, Grit, and Power. Come back again soon. We'll have more wonderful guests right here on Pro and Con. Thank you. Bye.